Although Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, and other whistleblowers and truth-tellers have seized the headlines, moving celebrities to make demands for justice that have inspired millions, there is one figure in the fight against totalitarian government of whom many have never heard. Why is that? Perhaps because the true story of the struggle for the rule of law in the United States after the catastrophic 2000 election has yet to be told. As far as even the alternative and conspiracy news are concerned, the events that this man was central to never happened. His name is Emanuel Pastreich, and he started his career as a professor of Asian studies at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign in 1998. Although Pastreich was trained in classical Chinese and Japanese literature at Yale and Harvard, he soon discovered the real potential at University of Illinois in its top-ranked School of Engineering. From 1999, he helped engineering professors to set up joint research projects in Asia, and as an American fluent in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, he could build bridges as few could. In 2000, Pastreich made a proposal for an internet-based joint instruction and research program between University of Illinois, University of Tokyo, Seoul National University, and Peking University, the top universities in Asia. The proposal was welcomed in the United States and in Asia. When Pastreich returned to Illinois after a series of successful meetings in Asia to discuss the implementation of the plan in July of 2000, however, he discovered that, oddly, no one at University of Illinois wanted to discuss the program that they had been so enthusiastic about just a few weeks before. The truth was, Pastreich had stepped on the toes of three powerful groups without even realizing it. His ideas about an America that perceived Asia as the future, and his advocacy of close collaboration with Asian universities, was deeply threatening to military contractors making a fortune off the threat of North Korea and China. They would stop at nothing to make sure that no American advocated for an alternative to their war preparations. There were also those who saw America as a Christian and white nation, and who wanted to make sure that Asian studies remained marginal, and that although some cooperation with Asia was necessary, it could never be equal to that with Britain, France, Israel, and other Western nations. Finally, there were the financial interests who would become the PayPal mafia, and later the Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Amazon monopolies. They saw the internet revolution as an opportunity to generate massive profits for multinational corporations by controlling all information through for-profit search engines, for-profit cloud servers, for-profit online learning, and for-profit social networks. These forces could not permit a model for the use of the internet that was not run for profit, that was administered by teachers and citizens, and that was participatory at the most fundamental level. These powers started monitoring Pastreich long before his trip to Asia in July of 2000. They ordered interference in Pastreich's efforts when his proposal gained too much support for their comfort. A full-fledged SAP, Special Access Program, run by the CIA and Air Force, was launched in June 2000. The operatives running the Special Access Program gave classified directives to Pastreich's colleagues, starting with his department head and his dean, that ordered them to be hostile to Pastreich's ideas. When Pastreich returned from a successful trip to Seoul, Beijing, and Tokyo to discover that no one wanted to talk to him or even to meet with him, he was startled. The next step in the campaign against him was to circulate rumors that Pastreich was suffering from mental illness and that his ideas about online learning were delusional, that there had never been any agreement with Asian universities, and that he had alienated his colleagues by his irrational actions. The situation went from confusing to menacing in December of 2000. The Bush administration seized control of the government, and it declared that it had won the election, which it had obviously lost, using the Supreme Court as a sock puppet. The military government they set up in Washington started a clampdown on all opposition, and that crackdown grew far more intense after they seized control of most of the military in February of 2001. Pastreich continued to make statements that the newly empowered military contractors pushing for a build-up for war in Asia could not tolerate. Pastreich discussed freely topics that were forbidden. The order went down that he was to be suicided immediately as an example for those trying to resist the Bush administration. Various figures behind the scene stepped in to defend Pastreich, and a deal was made that Pastreich would be placed on permanent disability for mental illness. After numerous death threats and other covert actions that rendered Pastreich a prisoner in his own home, Pastreich was ordered to report to a hospital where a doctor read to him a diagnosis of schizophrenia drafted without any medical tests, and then presented him with forms to sign in which he declared himself mentally incompetent. A strange, funny thing happened when he met with a doctor again the next week. The doctor expressed absolutely no interest in Pastreich's health. Instead, he asked for Pastreich's opinions on geopolitical issues and requested that Pastreich write a report on the critical security issues facing the United States. It became increasingly clear that Pastreich was talking with factions within the government opposed to the Bush administration through the medium of the doctor, and that they had stepped in to protect him, but that they also wanted his advice. There was another crisis in April of 2001 when it became clear that the Bush administration intended to establish an even more complete military dictatorship, employing the CIA as a private army domestically. The conversation with Pastreich evolved into a discussion of how to organize effective resistance, and Pastreich did his best. The full story of how an effective provisional government was set up in opposition to the Bush regime within the federal government in April 2001 has never been told. Some hints as to what transpired are presented, however, in the movie A Beautiful Mind. That hidden conflict, starting with intelligence and the military, but extending much further, produced substantial organized resistance to the Bush administration. The increasing effectiveness of that resistance drove the Bush administration into the arms of extreme factions within Mossad, and they worked together to orchestrate the 9/11 incident, ram through the Patriot Act, and take steps to permanently suppress organized opposition. In place of the federal government, they set up an invisible empire run for the Bush administration by multinational IT corporations like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Oracle, creating a shadow empire run by the bankers and IT billionaires. Pastreich also played a central role in the resistance to the war with Iraq, planned by the Bush administration in 2002, including his role in the open revolt of the military to the final orders to launch the invasion. That resistance reached its peak in the dramatic week before the bombings, during which the army refused to follow the orders of the Secretary of Defense to invade, and factions and intelligence released materials discrediting the entire drive for war. That story as well has never been treated by the alternative media. In the summer of 2002, Pastreich was permitted to have an affiliation with the Arms Control Disarmament and International Security Program at University of Illinois, but still prohibited from interacting with his own department. Finally, in the spring of 2004, he was allowed to teach again. But when the 2004 election ended in a debacle and pro-Bush intelligence operatives stepped in to shut down an election that John Kerry had clearly won, Pastreich's defenders in government were swept out. Pastreich was denied tenure for obscure reasons, and although he applied for hundreds of jobs, he did not even get a response to his applications. There was one position, and only one, for which he received a favorable response: a position as an analyst at the CIA. The CIA was the only institution in the United States with factions capable of saying no to Bush. Unemployed and broke, Pastreich decided to move his family to Washington, D.C. in December and try to find work there. Perhaps he thought that CIA offer would work out after all. Ultimately, however, the CIA rejected him, and, facing long-term unemployment, Pastreich sent his wife and children to live with his in-laws in Korea, and he stayed on in a tiny room lent to him by a friend while he desperately sought work. Out of the blue, Pastreich was invited to speak at a seminar on Korean diplomacy at the Senate building in February 2005. A Korean foreign correspondent befriended him and introduced him to the newly appointed Korean ambassador Hong Seok-hyun, who in turn negotiated with the Bush administration to give Pastreich a job at the Korean embassy. Extraterritoriality meant that working at the Korean embassy did not count as working in America, although Pastreich did not have to actually live in the embassy. Pastreich spent 2 years working at that low-paying job at the embassy, helping diplomats prepare for meetings, writing for the embassy website, and organizing cultural events like Kimchi Day. He accepted a job at a small Korean university, Wooseong University, in February 2007, recognizing that there were no prospects for employment in the United States. Ultimately, he would spend 15 years in Korea. Pastreich had to reinvent himself as an American concerned about Korea, eventually serving as an advisor to the governor of Cheongnam, future prime minister, to a science park, and later to the Korean president, Park Geun-hye. He wrote for Korean newspapers and published 7 books in Korean over a decade. He managed to move to a more prominent university, Kyunghee, granted that his income was limited and his activities outside of Korea were restricted. The campaign to take down Korean President Park Geun-hye in 2018, in part because she refused to go along with the Washington agenda for war with China and Russia, directly impacted Pastreich. His teaching position became more insecure, and his opportunities were greatly diminished. Moreover, his children and wife wished to return to the United States, which they did in 2019. Although Pastreich was able to get part-time work with the Korean Embassy and Korean Economic Institute in Washington, D.C., the full-time work that he had been promised was unexpectedly canceled at precisely the launch for COVID Reign of Terror. Joseph Nye, the former dean of the Harvard Kennedy School and a major figure in diplomacy, took Pastreich to lunch in February 2020, telling him in no uncertain terms that he had to go back to Asia immediately. Pastreich was already scheduled to travel to Seoul and Tokyo for 2 conferences at the time, and he had no choice but to stay on in Seoul, separated from family, penniless and homeless. Fortunately, a Korean friend found him a room for 2 weeks. After that, Pastreich stayed at a Korean temple for another month, and at last found part-time work that allowed him to support himself, living in a cheap hostel in Seoul. In bold defiance of the criminal COVID regime and the corrupt and incompetent candidates Trump and Biden in a rigged election, Pastreich declared his candidacy for president before leading for Asia and gave a series of moving speeches that gained him a significant following, which was later slashed by Homeland Security operatives. Pastreich did not stop writing speeches, however, for his presidential campaign, even though he was completely ignored by the US media when in Korea. Eventually, his writings were picked up by alternative media, sources like Global Research, and reached a broad audience in the United States. Pastreich found himself unemployed again in 2021 when the COVID operation reached a new intensity in Korea, and he decided to move to the small seaport of Yeosu, which was less oppressive, on the southern coast. When the COVID regime eased up in 2022, Pastreich relocated to Japan, where he found new support. At the time, Pastreich's demands that American politicians address state crimes like 9/11 and the COVID fraud found supporters within the Green Party US, specifically in the Green Liberty Caucus, which was working hard to build bridges between progressives and conservatives for what they called truth politics, that is, calling out state crimes. The Green Liberty Caucus asked Pastreich to run for president in the Green Party, and he readily agreed. Pastreich launched his campaign with a series of powerful speeches on September 11, 2023, from Tokyo, but sadly, the Green Party was infiltrated with Homeland Security operatives who were determined to block him out of the media and to limit his actions in the Green Party. Even though Pastreich and Cornel West were the only 2 candidates running for president in the Green Party in 2023, the Green Party pretended as if Pastreich did not exist. Pastreich called off that campaign after 1 month of constant frustrations, blocked from addressing the members of the Green Party, and attacked for pushing vaccine conspiracies. Cornel West, the other candidate, also quit just a few days later. Pastreich continued to deliver speeches as an independent candidate until November.
We go forward bravely and with optimism, not to make America great again, but rather to make America great for the first time. Or, as Langston Hughes put it in his poem, out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, and the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again. I may be elected president. I may end my days in extreme poverty, which is nothing to be ashamed of. I may end up locked up in a prison or a mental hospital on trumped up charges, or maybe I will be found floating in some river. That part of our struggle is totally unimportant for you. What I promise you is that Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, the families of Windsor, Saab, Walton, Koch, Rockefeller, and DuPont, and the rest of that crew of techno-tyrants and bio-fascists in Washington and in Berlin, in Tokyo and in Moscow, in London and in Beijing are going down. They will be punished and their true crimes made known to the world. We do not care how many politicians they own, how many billions of dollars they claim to possess, or how many celebrities and authorities they keep as pets. We must struggle with the old enemies of peace: business and financial monopoly, speculation, reckless banking, class antagonism, sectionalism, and war profiteering. They consider government of the United States as a mere appendage of their own affairs. We know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. Never before in our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand now. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
He established the Center for Truth Politics at Green Liberty after that failed election to serve as his primary political platform. Pastreich continues his battle for accountable governance from his new location in Tokyo, rallying Americans in the face of the spreading darkness, a systemic collapse, and fascistic politics, and reaching out to the international community. His writings have been translated into some 40 languages.